What's up, folks? I wanted to take a quick moment to kind of talk about the moment we're in with X-Wing right now, kind of touch on the community basics, and do a kind of high-level highlight of the conversation as it stands now, kind of what we're looking at moving forward. To do that, though, one of the biggest points of, I'm not going to say contention, one of the biggest things that people are talking about is the different versions of X-Wing. So to start this, we'll need a real quick recap of the 3 editions of X-Wing. We have 2.5, which is the current, till recently, version of the game. And then we have 2nd edition, or 2.0, and then we have 1st edition, or 1.0. One of the more confusing things about this exact moment is that there are starter sets on the shelves for all 3 of those rule sets, where if someone were to buy a box of the X-Wing miniatures game, they could find any one of these three rule sets in it. And that is before we would get any kind of community engagement to agree on a kind of community rule set. So the community is going to be around for a long time. One kind of key thing I'm going to highlight multiple times here is that the bulk of players, no matter what these communities decide, are just going to play what they can. Like what their playgroup decides on, what their friends and family decide to play, what the people who introduced them to the game decide to play. So as much as we're all kind of talking about this as a community, as kind of a broad overarching goal of like where we want to be, that's really going to help with competitive events and like formal organized play, which we probably will still do. But really, the bulk of it is going to be a little bit more chaotic than this is going to sound. But jumping right in. So the current version of X-Wing miniatures is what you're seeing in front of you. This is one of the Galactic Empire Squadron starter packs, where they just recently released these, and then also the Rebel Alliance one as well. They come with 4 ships, they come with all the individual components to play the game, and they also come with the actual written rule set that was developed by Atomic Mass Games a few years back. Now, there are some key differences with 2.5. Number 1 is going to be in terms of list building. So for list building in 2.5, you get a 20 points base to spend on ships and pilots. And then each pilot comes with a separate pool of points for upgrades specifically for them. So looking at this, I believe Darth Vader comes in at 7 points. Custom Vader comes in at 7. I don't know if he's actually in this box. So you pay 7 of your 20, so you're down to 13 extra for pilots. But then Vader himself comes with something like 18 loadout points, where you can spend up to 18 points on upgrades specifically for Vader. That was one way to kind of balance it out and kind of streamline the amount of points that you had. Another key difference about 2.5 is it took the single game type of dogfighting and expanded that into 4. So you've got the dogfight version, you've got a pick up and run objective version, you've got an area control objective version, and then you have a beat buttons more than your opponent version. So added some additional ways to play the game competitively as well as casually. Those are kind of the key structural changes, but also there were some rules tweaks. There were some changes to how Ion works, not going to get into that. But some of the other big ones were if you fly over a rock in 2.5, you take automatic damage, and then roll a die to see if you take more damage, which is more damage than the previous. And then also if you do fly one of your ships into another one of your ships, you take damage, or you roll a die to see if you take damage. So it's more punishing than it was before. And then also, if you are touching an opposing ship, you actually can attack. There's a range 0 attack option there. And then I believe lastly is kind of the high-level changes. Somebody will call me out on things I miss. But one of the top-level changes is how you determine who goes first in each turn, which matters if you have 2 pilots that have the same skill. So 2 pilots who are initiative 6, for example. Which player goes first says a lot about how you choose to move where and when. Because knowing where your opponent's going to be or knowing whether or not your opponent will have moved before you is a huge piece of information that can determine the winner or loser of a game. The way X-Wing 2.5 approaches that is both players set their dials, choose where they're going to go, and then both players roll a set of dice, and then the winner, whoever rolls highest, is first player. You don't get to choose, which was another thing about the previous editions. It's just whoever wins higher, they have initiative. So it's after dials, so you do it a little bit more chaotically where you don't have complete information. And that is called, again, I don't know if I said it or not, ROAD, random order after dials. So you set your dials, then check the random order. That's some of the key highlight differences with 2.5. So then we'll go ahead and talk about the older versions. So this is the starter box for 2nd edition. This one, couple key changes. So The obstacles and bumping yourself are both lesser, so it was actually a very viable strategy in 2.0 to fly over a rock to get a better position because there was a risk of damage, never a guarantee, and never 2 damage. And bumping your own ships was actually a very common strategy to control your movement because the biggest aspect of 2.0 was jockeying for position to make sure you got the ideal engagement. So anything you can do to kind of control where your ships go, whether it was in the spirit of the game or not, was kind of a key part of the game. And both of those are things that were changed in 2.5 to kind of discourage some of the play based around those. But key differences in 2.0, it's only dogfighting, and points were very different. So in 2.0, you had a pool of 200 points, and you would spend those points on upgrades or ships interchangeably. So if you take a 12-point proton torpedoes, that is 12 point less of pilots you can take for the rest of your squad. So there's a lot of work around like jockeying upgrades versus efficiency, and people talk a lot about generics. So like your Red Squadron pilot X-Wing versus Luke Skywalker, there's a dramatic cost difference there where it was often better to take 1.5 other X-Wings than it was to take Luke because he was at a much higher price point. So that was kind of the biggest difference. So only dogfighting. We'll talk about one in a minute. Single pool of points for both, but it had 200 points instead of 20. One of the single most common complaints about the transition from 2.0 to 2.5 is that going from 200 to 20 does definitely narrow the gap between pilots. So what was a 20-point pilot versus an 18-point pilot, both of those would probably end up being 3-point pilots in 2.5. So with very little difference between them, which has been a little bit challenging to encourage players to use different pilots. Not going to get into that debate too much, but that is one of the core debates of 2.0 versus 2.5 is the G word, granularity. Another key thing about 2.0 is that in both 2.0 and 1.0, instead of that random order after dials, the way you determine who goes first is for the entire game. There's a single roll at the beginning to decide who gets first. Or the original rule in the first edition was Empire goes first. Not a great rule, but it was in there. Just because the Empire has initiative. But they added another mechanic called bidding. In both 1.0 and 2.0, if you didn't spend your full deck points. So if you had 200 points to spend and you only spent 180, if your opponent spent more than 180, you had the option to choose whether you wanted to go first or second. So by going with your deep, deep bid, you had a lot of control over the entire outcome of the game. And whatever was decided by that bid was the entire game long. Decided at the beginning, whole rest of the game, you would decide who went first or second. Yeah, we're not going to tuck into that too much just yet. We're going to go ahead and talk about this. So this is 2.0. 1.0, again, was very similar, except instead of 200 squad points, you had 100. Another really, really key difference about 1.0 that makes it easy to pick out if you see the products or not, is that in 1.0, every single points cost of a pilot or an upgrade, every single slot that a pilot had available to put upgrades into was printed on the cards. So you didn't have to go to an online list builder. You didn't have to search around online for the latest errata or anything. It was just on the cards. Now that, and another key difference, one of the most significant differences between 1.0 and 2.0 is that 2.0 had a 200-point pool, 1.0 has a 100-point pool, right? So that's a very, very quick and dirty description of the differences between 1, 2, and 2.5, the 3 editions. I do want to highlight real quick one of the key points about balance, game balance, because one goal for the designers all the way through the entire history of X-Wing for both companies that have developed it is making sure that squads have a relatively even play against each other. Oh, excuse me, one other key difference, and a very important one, is 1.0 only had 2 factions at launch and ended with 3, Rebels, Empire, and Scum and Villainy. 2.0 added went up to a full 7, adding both the sequel factions of the Resistance and First Order and the prequel factions of the Galactic Republic and the Separatist Alliance. So 3 factions, 7 factions, 7 factions. That's important too. Because one of those key things is that the game balance across the game is really important and has been all along, which obviously presented a very big problem in 1.0 when points were printed on the cards and upgrade slots were printed on the cards. There was no easy way to add or remove a slot or change the points in any way. So late 1.0 had this very weird period where you had a title that would be given to a ship that had negative points values, for example. So it'd be a title that would add additional abilities, do something else, and be like, -3 points to make this ship cost, something more like it should in the current balance. Obviously not sustainable. It got pretty weird. If you ever find a 1.0 card with hole punches through it, they also released errata sometimes that would remove a upgrade slot from a specific pilot, and they obviously couldn't reprint all the cards they did that for. So like the Jump Master was a cataclysmic failure of game balance. We'll just call it like it is. When that released, the weird Croissant Jump Master. So you'll find some of those that have been hole punched, so they're missing the upgrades that were nerfed off them. But yeah, anyway, we won't get too far into that. But that's 1.0. We owe 1.0 a lot of credit because it was the edition that started the game, and for that sheer simplicity of being able to play out of the box, that's really cool. That was a really good thing about it that I loved at first, but definitely saw the problems live once we got later into the balance. In 2.0, you don't see the card values printed on the points values printed on the cards. They are then moved to online list builders, which is an extra logistical hurdle, but was such a massive improvement for game balance that it kind of worked out. In addition to the points values, it also had the upgrade slots were in the online builders as well, so those could be changed in terms of balance, where, for example, if a pilot having access to a missile was too strong, you could remove the missile slot from that pilot, and then that would be a lever to pull for balance. Likewise, in 2.5, you had the same thing, where points are online, and both the points cost of the pilot and the total loadout value you could spend on upgrades for that pilot could both be adjusted up and down as need for balance arose. And that was particularly important. Well, excuse me. Where's I going with that? Was not going with that. Anyway, so there's always that push and pull between ease of play out of the box, between total overall game balance, between granularity and kind of ease of use. So yeah, that is our quick and dirty crash course of the 3 editions of X-Wing. So whenever people are talking about these individual editions in these online conversations, hopefully that kind of helps prime an understanding of where this is coming from. So we'll go ahead and go on to our next one. Aha. And so I also want to go ahead and call out the 2 individual communities who are kind of most involved right now, the 2 biggest communities. And like I said before, most of this is going to be individual players or small groups playing whatever they can or whatever they agree upon individually. But it would be nice to kind of have an umbrella that can put a lot of resource and attention into having a consistent vision of the game moving forward. And so we've got a lot of fairly significant luminaries of the community kind of cooperating together on this. So I'm going to go ahead and read this letter. And you probably have already seen it, but just to do it. Dear X-Wing community, by now most of you have read the news of AMG ending development of both Star Wars X-Wing and Star Wars Armada. After that news went public, a group of players representing communities across the world came together to create a unified organization to take community stewardship of X-Wing. This group includes the people behind several high-profile X-Wing communities and resources, and our collaborative goal is to keep the game healthy, guided into the future. This is not an exclusive or closed group, and we will strive for transparency at all times. Rest assured that we will do our very best to make sure that the end of the official development does not mean the end of the game that we all love. We are still in the early stages of defining what needs to be done, and more communication will follow as details become available. For now, keep playing the game and look to the future with hope and anticipation. Today marks the start of a new chapter of the X-Wing story, and we are out to make it the best one yet. And this is, I really appreciate this messaging. This was well put together. This is a very shockingly well-coordinated and very large group of people, and you've got a list of those individual people involved who signed off on this letter, each of whom also belongs to a larger, fairly significant community. So you see a good number of names on here, and that also expands broadly across the entire world. You've got competitive players, you've got team captains of XTC, you've got bloggers, podcasters, both Andre Lind and where are you, buddy? Stephen Kim, both of the 2 major list builder engineers. Stephen Kim, also host of the Off Meta podcast. Both really phenomenal members of the community for a long time. We've also got Jim Bob on there of Infinite Arenas, who also manages the X-Wing Hub. We've got Daniel Lim, who's been just a massive supporter of the community for a long time. You've got, I think, 4 individual members of Gold Squadron podcast. You've got Pink Brain Matter on there. You've got a lot on there. And you'll see a lot of individual affiliations listed in that group. I have personally heard from several people, or seen in the massive amount of Discords we're all in now, a number of people from these groups say that they didn't sign up for this organization, but are still going to be involved kind of peripherally because somebody they're close to is actively on this. So I believe these folks are calling themselves the X-Wing Alliance, if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of the shorthand for what they're doing. And very, very cool. And just to kind of outline what they've started doing, number one, they're actively talking. coordinating, kind of trying to figure out and find common ground. They are also looking at some revised points. There are already a couple kind of informal proposed points revisions, so updates on the current points for 2.5 in the current competitive season. But one of the big things these guys are doing is they're taking kind of a long view. At this exact moment, we still have a worldwide, organized, a lot of effort put into it, organized play season using Atomic Mass Games' rules across the world with some major tournaments and events planned out through next spring. So these folks are kind of looking at planning ahead, but also shepherding and supporting that organized play series through into early next year, and then again, kind of taking the long view. And now people, especially Jim Bob and the squad builders, are doing a lot to support the community with different options as well. We should be very grateful for all of their work because they are giving us opportunities to test out and try stuff informally before we kind of move the community in any dramatic direction. This is one of the key camps. I believe it is by a good bit the largest and is probably the most influential just because what of a massive voice and audience they have. The other group that's a kind of cohesive group that's come up is going to be the X-Wing Legacy community. And I wanted to go ahead and highlight this too. I'm going to try to read this. We'll see how long it takes. This is from one of the Discord members of the X-Wing 2.0 Legacy community. We'll see what you are. Like all of you in the X-Wing community, we are saddened to hear the end of AMG active development for the game. This will make continuing to play the game we all love more difficult, but we also see this as a chance to bring the larger X-Wing community back together around a common set of interests. Fortunately, we have a common point of view of reference to begin that journey from. X-Wing Legacy represents what is commonly known as X-Wing 2.0, with only a couple minor additions. As far as I know, there's basically no additions to the rule, and has been maintained since the introduction of version 2.5. Regardless if you are a longtime fan of X-Wing or if you started new with 2.5, we've been working hard to prepare Legacy for your arrival. If you are new, we have guides to help you learn the 2.0 format. Our team has long been working to preserve FFG, the original developer of the game's legacy, and design with points updates and additional formats to accommodate all new content released by AMG, be it as new pilots or the left side legal LSL framework that allows customization of your AMG standard loadout SL cards. Ooh, interesting. In short, all of the fun playing your old favorite and new ships is right here, found in the standard format. For those of you who love some of the new content, we have Wild Space, a format of 200 points or 250 points that includes scenario play and use of SL cards. Finally, Epic is a fully functional and operational battle format with points and the same rules from 2.0. These different formats create multiple ways in which the community can come together while we find a larger path forward. And there's stuff going on here. And a couple shout outs, the tabletop simulator, that's just been an incredible piece of technology all the way along, does have stuff that fully supports the X-Wing Legacy. They have a squad builder and some bots, tournament, or server bots, okay. Tournament support with data gathering. There's a lot of really good stuff here. No ban lists, which is an interesting call. Public play testing and feedback, so they've got that too. Let's see, in all things there's balance, light and dark. Legacy has changes, but surprisingly what people may not know is that we are extremely careful to maintain a viable format for everyone based on what already exists. While we maintain the essential system of 2.0, we want everyone to understand that Legacy is open to change in a controlled, steady fashion. This is a labor of love for many who invest their time and effort into building communities, running tournaments, creating content, etc. Rest assured that your time and effort will be highly appreciated and collaborated with by a team of equally committed folks with a steady hand at the wheel. For those who wish to join us, we invite you to visit our website and or our Discord server, and they have a link to their Legacy site, which I will certainly post in the comments here. We'll come back to this. Let's see what else I have next on deck. This is 5. So here's actually the website itself. And it's pretty cool. They've got a lot of resources here if you want to see what Legacy is all about. They have pretty frequent updates talking about kind of what changes they've been making and talking about the individual pieces and aspects that go into it. It's a really nicely put together website and really appreciate that. What do we got on 7? Here, of course, is the X-Wing Hub. 8, we'll get to that later. So yes, to kind of reiterate and wrap it all back together, we've got 3 individual communities, really. But it's very difficult to figure out which one is the biggest. But so we've got the X-Wing Alliance, we've got X-Wing 2.0 Legacy, and then we've got pretty much everybody sort of caught in the middle here in limbo. And every single individual player can choose kind of which of these camps they sort of fall in. And then, of course, everyone's going to end up playing what they can play in person or what they choose to put together a group to play. So there's that. I want to go back to this. I do want to talk about this. I don't want to be too for or against any camp, because I really appreciate any effort to unite the community and kind of talk about this. And really, really appreciate X-Wing Alliance. I appreciate the Legacy community for being out there. One part I am somewhat annoyed by, and many others are as well, is that even this announcement does a really significant job of overriding exactly why X-Wing Legacy is so well fleshed out. And the biggest reason being that this is a group of people who were extremely antagonistic towards the changes made in 2.5. I'm going to call it out. That is what happened. And who were unwilling to adopt some of the key rules changes. And this sort of softens that note a little bit, but we're talking about a large group of people who don't want to play to objectives, don't want to play road, they don't want to play that new objective rule, they want to keep bidding, they don't like the new bumping rules, they don't like the new obstacle rules, they don't like the new range 0 attacks rules. And I mean, I can quibble about each individual rule quite a bit, but having played 1.0 and 2.0, I do see 2.5 in many ways as the natural evolution of the game. I'm going to be honest, I do think that after a lot of play, I do think that the 20 points is rather limiting. But for me, I've seen a little bit of chatter come up where one of the key ways to take this is instead of going back to a previous role, we actually really like loadout values because that's a great lever to pull for balance for the game. And does give you kind of a little bit... I don't even know how to say this, but we'll just gloss over that. I don't miss building lists from a single pool of points, where every upgrade you put on a ship took away from the number of bodies you had on the board. I did not like that. Personally, I also really, really didn't enjoy bidding. Bidding was an awkward system that was dramatically abused. I mentioned 20-point bids. I believe they went quite a bit deeper than that, where players would sacrifice a lot of their loadout value and squad size to guarantee that their super, super powerful pieces had every possible advantage. I didn't like it. But then the single things that I disliked the most about 2.0 as an addition, I'll probably get some hate for this, whatever, were self-bumping and toilet bowling. Both of these were kind of related to the same thing. And self-bumping is, like I mentioned before, is deliberately running into your own ships to keep your ships moving slowly so that you can avoid actually fighting for as long as possible. It made for a really boring, unpleasant play experience where both players were jockeying to be like, I'm going to move as slowly as possible. You'll make the first move. No, you'll make the first move. I know a lot of players really loved that, but it did not feel like playing a game. It felt like reverse chicken? I don't even know what to call it because you're not running at each other. You're deliberately not running at each other. So that was a big thing. The other thing was what I said was toilet bowling, which is the same idea where both players stay at opposite sides of the map and keep circling around each other and not engaging. Both of these, I've seen a lot of players argue these weren't problems, but that they were potential viable ways to competitively play the game was very problematic. And I played games that were defined by both of those things, and it was really unpleasant. There's also fortressing, which is self-bumping, where you choose not to move at all, where your ships just sort of circle and bump each other to where they don't move out of the space. Yeah, these were things that were potential problems in 1.0, became dramatic problems in 2.0, and just were fundamental design flaws in the game. And these are helped a lot by the self-bumping rules and the obstacle rules, and then playing with objectives, where if somebody sits in a corner and doesn't engage, whatever, you get all the points on the board from objectives. I understand wanting to have a conversation about the game design and kind of change it around. But the Legacy community has been actively dismissive of the changes and has been very, very dismissive of the people who appreciate the rules changes. We'll say like, hey, this fixed this issue. They'll be like, oh, that wasn't an issue. Or we'll say like, well, this is better in this way. They'll be like, no, that's not better. But my biggest gripe, whatever, is that I do, and this is fair or not, I do personally hold the Legacy community, maybe just some very vocal members of it, but I hold the Legacy community responsible for making the X-Wing Miniatures subreddit a toxic hellhole. Fair or not, but the X-Wing Miniatures subreddit for a very long time was just an incredibly unhelpful, unpleasant place to be that just kind of destroyed significant chunks of the community, drove away a lot of new players, and most old hat players don't even go there anymore because they know that it's become that bad. And it is the X-Wing 2.0 Legacy community that is responsible for the bulk of that. even in the past week, I've seen a lot of snarky comments about AMG shills or AMG shills mostly. There was something else too, like there's some very nasty derogatory stuff. And the day the AMG announcement came out, I saw on that subreddit a comment where somebody said, anybody who does not immediately go back to 2.0 now should be taken out back and shot. And there is no community anywhere that is any place for that kind of people. And yes, there's a lot of nice language coming out of the legacy community now. I am cautiously optimistic about how they manage things moving forward, but the reason the community exists at all is built on a lot of spite. And there are a lot of elements about 2.0 that a lot of players who've gotten used to a different way of play don't want to go back to. And that is one of the most fundamental reasons why we have a community divide. Which, whatever, play the way you want. That's fine. Play 2.0 if you want. Play 1.0 if you want. Play 2.5. Play a mix of all of it. Play whatever you want. The key thing is that everyone should feel comfortable talking about this, comfortable playing the different versions, comfortable doing this in whatever way they want. It's a game with plastic spaceships. But significant communities should be held responsible for their behavior overall, and that has not always been the case. Yeah, I'm going to get a lot of hate for that one, but had to be said. And recently, the legacy community has seen this kind of moment as their moment to claw back the community. And of course, everyone is going to come back to legacy, completely disregarding the fact that, again, a lot of players out there like a significant chunk of the changes. We'll probably talk about going back to a 200-point system, but I really like loadout value. I think that adjusting the loadout value system is a better way to go than going back to single pool system. I really like objectives, or missions. I would rather see more objective missions than remove them entirely. I don't think that pure dogfighting, intentional self-bumping, I don't think that was the best way to play the game. At the time, it was the best we had. It was a dramatic improvement on 1.0. Cool. That does not make it the be-all, end-all of the game. And yeah, so if you see a lot of noise from the legacy community, appreciate what they're doing, appreciate the work they put into it. They are doing a lot here. But they burned a whole lot of bridges very, very quickly, and I've never rebuilt those. And now is kind of an awkward time to jump in and kind of dance on some graves, while at the same time kind of assuming that everyone is going to come right back to 2.0. But we'll see what happens. Whatever. I've ranted a lot. This is not the direction I necessarily planned to go in the beginning, but I did want to make sure to go ahead and highlight the kind of major group development, see what's going on, and a lot of this is kind of hurry up and wait, right? So we're looking at two different significantly organized communities kind of driving different futures. We're looking at the disparate players kind of just figuring out what they're doing. And then we're talking about, where to go next. So who knows? I believe the basic consensus is just to kind of play around, keep playing the game, enjoying it, experiment with new rules. I've seen several revised points come out, but no one's really settled on one as like the points revision. But they are actively being play tested now, which is awesome, because that makes it very likely that when we get our hands on new points, whatever version they end up being, that they will be thoroughly tested and should be very appealing. And from what I've seen so far, I'm very optimistic. But this is in my new player channel. Hopefully this wasn't too much of a ramble for you all new players. I'm going to complete the content in this, because at some point somewhere, people are going to come to the game. They will come to the game with the printed directions in the box. And that is most likely going to be 2.5. So that's the rule set I've been covering. It's the one I'm going to continue covering. But I will also be covering wherever the game goes from here, because I love the game, love the community, and want to see where it goes from here. So cheers. There we go. Until next time.